Okay, so we're going to focus on the big picture of the immune system. So first of all, as with this topic, we've got a number of key definitions. So pathogens are disease-causing organisms. Not every bacteria or fungi will act as a pathogen. So the vast majority of microorganisms are non-disease causing, and it's only the pathogens that will actually cause a disease within an organism. And with the immune system topic, it's all very much about specificity of language. So here are some key definitions that we will be using a lot throughout this module. So antigens, our 3-mark definition, are proteins or glycoproteins that are found on the surface of cells, and an antigen that's found on the surface of a pathogen will be recognised as non-self by the immune system, and that will trigger an immune response. Our body cells will also be covered in proteins and glycoproteins. They'll be covered in antigens, but they will be recognised as being self-antigens belonging to the host organism, and they would not trigger an immune response. So it's the different shaped proteins or glycoproteins, the different shaped antigens on the surface of a pathogen that actually triggers the immune response. It is not the pathogen necessarily itself, it is the antigen on the surface of the pathogen. And we'll come to look at this in lessons later on in the week, but antibodies are protein molecules that are made by very special types of white blood cells called B plasma cells, and they are produced in response to a specific antigen. And you can basically think about antigens, these proteins and glycoproteins, as having a very specific shape, and it's that specific shape that is detected by the immune system. It's detected as being different to the antigen shape that would normally be on a body cell. Now, our antigens can be found in lots of different places. So antigens, these proteins or glycoproteins, they can be found on the cell surface membranes of pathogens. They can also be found on the surface of cells from organisms of the same species. So for example, when we have organ transplants, the cells that make up maybe the heart, the transplanted heart, will have slightly different antigens on its surface to the antigens that would be found in the person that's going to receive the heart transplant. So our immune system may recognise the antigens on the heart to be transplanted as non-self antigens, and that's why we end up having immune responses generated in transplant patients. So they have to spend their whole life taking anti-rejection drugs to prevent or suppress the immune system from attacking the transplanted organ. We will find that when our cells in our body become infected or become abnormal, maybe due to turning cancerous, then the antigens on the surface of those cells change, and the immune system can recognise those changed antigens and identify that that cell has now become abnormal because it has a different array of antigens on its surface. And then sometimes toxins which are released by the pathogen itself can act as antigens. So when we think about pathogens, we can have antigens on the surface, or we can have antigens that are released by the pathogen. Now, if a pathogenic organism gets past all of those barriers that we talked about in our starter activity and actually gets into the body fluid, so whether it's getting into the blood, the lymph tissue, the lymph fluid, the tissue fluid, then that will cause a series of immune responses to take place. And we can divide those responses into either specific immune responses or non-specific immune responses. And this diagram we'll keep coming back to throughout the topic. So these represent our barriers, whether they are our chemical, physical, mechanical or biological barriers. if our pathogen manages to get past those barriers, then an immune response will be triggered. Now, we can divide our immune response based on whether it's a non-specific immune response or whether it's a specific immune response, and different types of white blood cell will be involved. So today we're just going to focus on these two non-specific immune responses, the response of inflammation or the response of phagocytosis. And as the name suggests, this response will be the same irrespective of what pathogen has got past the body barriers. So if we think about the non-specific immune response of inflammation, the inflammation response is basically in response to the tissue damage. So if our pathogen has got past our physical barriers, then the inflammation response would be that area would become red, and that's due to our blood vessels dilating and increasing blood flow to the area to hopefully to be able to bring the white blood cells of the immune system to where the pathogen is. That will then result in the formation of increased tissue fluid. If you've got more blood flow to an area, more tissue fluid will form. That will cause swelling of the area, and the swelling will then result in pain because the swollen tissues will press on pain receptors and nerves that will be found in that area.